I was given a bundle of leftover fabrics in this bag. When I pull them out, there's lots of scraps and a few larger pieces. These are remnants from somebody else's quilting. Some really pretty fabric here. Let me show you how simple it is to turn these remnant scraps into a duo of beautiful quilts. First, I'm going to make a dripping diamond, and this is also called a chandelier quilt. It's easy, and I'll show you just how to do it. At the same time, I'm going to stitch together some 5-inch squares from leftovers for the easiest quilt you'll ever make. Before I begin the first quilt, I'm actually just going to cut 3 15.5-inch squares from this pretty butterfly fabric. They're actually for the second quilt, and I'm just going to set those aside. Quilt 1 is going to be made from strips. It's going to be what I call a dripping diamond. Some people call it a chandelier. There's just several names for it. You'll see as I go along. And for that, I do need some white. So I do have a big piece of white here. Now this is not a scrap, this is a piece that I've bought. And I also need some black. Too much gold in this, so I'm going to use this plainer black that I have. I'm going to cut some 2.5-inch strips from this and these colours. I have cut all the pieces I need for this quilt that I'm going to make. And also, I've made this sample block. I like to make a sample block, even though I've done this pattern before. So usually I'll make one sample block just to check my sizes as I remember them. And so that's what that is. And also this will be good for keeping everything in the right orientation. So the first thing we're going to do is this section here, which are these 4 2.5-inch squares. So there are 2 black and 2 coloured in each little 4 patch block. And so of course I'm going to chain sew these. So I've already got these divided into sets of 2, and I'm just going to go to the machine and chain them. But the other thing that I'm doing here that is a little bit different is I'm going to be sewing together 5-inch squares ready for the second quilt. And this way the second quilt will be partly sewn. You could make a quilt like this using charm packs. Every time I would put a bumper stopper in, I'm just going to sew 2 of these squares together. A little larger than what I usually do when I'm doing this, and I'll be saving myself time in the long run. So I'm just going to stack these by my sewing machine. Easy for me to access. This is just straightforward chain sewing. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm putting right sides together. Now I'm not worrying too much if I get these out of order, because it's pretty clear which one goes to which one, but as I sew them through they should stay together. So this is made up of 13 blocks. I've already made the one sample, so here I'm making 12 blocks. And we just sew this one, and I'll show you another thing I'm going to do here. I already know that at the end I'm going to need this black sewn onto the strip of white. So another thing I'm going to do while I'm doing this is I'm going to take 12 of my strips, and I'm going to sew one of these black squares onto the end of 12 of these. And there's a second white strip that's 10.5 that I'm going to treat the same way. I'll chain sew these and then put them to one side for later. Now don't forget that this black square only goes on 1/2. There are 2 of these white strips. One is plain and one has the black square. So I'm just going to run those all through together. So we'll be back when I've got these all sewn. Just sewing the last of my chain sewing through here. And this is where I'm going to take a couple of my 5-inch squares, sew them together. Now I quite often do this instead of using a little extra piece of fabric, because I have a lot of 2.5-inch squares, and quite often I'll just leave them by my machine and use those instead, and then eventually I have a stack that I can make into something. But in this case I'm just using it as an opportunity to get ready for sewing together the next part of this video, which is the simple quilt I'm going to make after this. So I'm just going to cut these apart, and I'm going to press them all. And I'm going to press to the dark side. Here are the white and black ones sewn together that I was doing. All these strips now I'm just going to put to one side, because these will be the last thing to go onto each block. These are the black and coloured centre. I'm going to sew these together now. They're going to go like that. So I'm just going to fold each one down. I'm going to nest the seams together. I can feel those sitting there nicely. Put a pin in them and sew down this seam. And I'm just going to chain sew all of these together, and I'll have 12 little blocks of 4. And I'm going to keep on chain sewing these. I was just going to show you how nicely those 4 corners sit together when you nest the seam. Do you see that? They all meet up nicely in the middle. These 4 patches are all done now. I'm just going to turn these so that they're all the same orientation. This way, when I put the next row on, everything will be facing the right way. Okay, I can look at my sample here, and it shows me what I need to do next. So this is the centre. So I'm going to lay those the same way that the centre on this one is laying. So they're going to go there like that. Now the next thing that I've got is a set. Now there's 2 in each set of these. One is a 4.5 and one is a 6.5. And what I'm going to do with these, I'm going to sew one onto this side and one onto the top. But I'm always going to look at my sample and make sure that I sew it on the same side. The black squares have to be in the position shown. All my seams I want to go in the same direction, so the short one goes on first. So I'm just going to move that. And I'm going to lay all my 4.5 ones there, and then when I come to do it, I'll just fold those over and sew down there, and that again is 1/4 inch seam. Then I'll press that out, put this one on the top, fold it down, sew 1/4 inch seam. So let's do this part first. Now my only rule for laying out this one will be, when I do this centre, I want a different colour. I don't want the same colour in there twice. So I'll set these to one side for later, and we'll go ahead and chain sew these onto here. And again the 5-inch squares. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the next step. I have my pile of 6.5s here, and I'm just going to make sure each one matches up, and it's just going to sew along the top. So I'll fold that down, sew down there. When I've got all those done, I'll show you the next step. These are all sewn on now. This is the long side that I just sewed on there. And I've got them all stacked up so that they're all lined up the same way. Now the next row that I've got here is going to go around this edge. Do you notice the similarity here to log cabin? But we're not going all the way around. This corner is going to stay this corner. We're only building on this side of the block. Now I have a 6.5 and an 8.5. And we're going to put these on here. And again, remember this is the short side, so we're going to do the short side onto this side again. So that one will sew along there, and the long one afterwards will sew on there. So for the moment, we're just going to sew this side on. I'm going to line them all up, flip it in, sew down the 1/4 inch. Now, again, you don't want the same colours in the same block. So you may want to spread your pieces out and make sure that doesn't happen. It depends how many different colours and things you've got in here. I'm going to line all these up next to them, make sure that none of the colours are the same. So I've got 3 different colours, and I'm going to sew this edge piece on. And this is sewn on just in the same way as the row before. This side is done now. And now we're going to lay the top. So it's just the same process as before. This side, top, this side, top, until these 2 layers are all on. So I'm going to match these up, fold it down, and sew 1/4 inch down there. And it is important, I'm saying this again I guess, that you keep these all in the same orientation. That way you don't get muddled up and sew things to the wrong side. So I'm ready to sew these now. So here's the stack that we've just been working on. We just put the 6.5 and the 8.5 on here. Now we have to do 2 rows of white. So you'll remember that already we've sewn the 2.5 inch black onto one strip. These are 8.5 inches, and there's also a 10.5 inch row. I didn't add that second row on this sample. It actually doesn't matter which way round you do this, it'll look just the same either way, but just to stay in the same patterning that I'm doing, I'm going to sew this side on first. So here, all these plain pieces, I'm going to stack up, sew 1/4 inch down there. So we'll do that, and then the other piece will go across the top. And that's the one with the 2.5 inch black square already added. That's what it'll look like. So we'll just do the white pieces first. Let's take those to my sewing machine. And there's no difference here in adding this white one, it's just the same as we've just been doing. Here's this stack done with the white sewn on the side, and now I'm going to stack all of these and sew them on there. And what I'm going to do here again is I'm going to put a pin in here and nest this. So unfortunately, because I've been pressing all my seams outwards, that means that here I had to press to the white side, which really I prefer not to do. I always try to press to the dark side if possible, but it just doesn't work here. Of course I could just not nest the seams, but you just get a much better result if you do this. So each one, I'm just going to put the pin there, and then again 1/4 inch seam down there. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing this now, and then there'll be just one more round the same but with the 10.5 inch strips. And there are some side pieces to put in, and it looks like it's difficult, but it really isn't. Keep watching and I'll show you what we're going to do. So I have my stack of squares, and now I'm going to put this second layer of white and black on here. So again, I'm looking at which one was the small side. These are all oriented the same way. I have a 10.5 inch, and I'm just going to do 1/4 inch seam down there. When I've done that, we'll put the top on, and that'll be this one finished. And the next step is identical, so I'm just going to jump ahead. Let me hold that up so you can see. You see how that's going to make 2 black squares together there? When we lay it like that, That's going to make the dripping diamond effect, this row. They'll all fall in a row. And you'll see that when I lay them together. So for now, let's just go ahead and sew this row on. And then these squares will be done. I've brought my blocks in here and I'm going to lay them out on this old bedspread that I've got here, because I think that it'll show up against this colour. So it's a bit of a wobbly base because it's standing on a bed. We'll just have to see how this goes. So what I'm doing is I'm laying these out, not in a straight row, but at an angle. And I will move the camera around so that you can see this in the right direction. At the moment, I've just got it laid on the side because it would be in my way if I had it here. Can you see how that's beginning to come together? Maybe I should just move the camera anyway. You might get a better view this way. Now, once I've got this laid out, I may move these blocks around a little bit so there isn't quite so much the same colours laying close together. But at the moment, I'm just putting it out so you can see it. Go around there and lay one more in. I hope you can see that okay. So the next thing that we have to do here is fill in these triangles that are the sides. So I don't know, maybe you feel worried about that, but really it's really easy. There's two ways to do this. And the way I'm going to show you today is I'm just going to put plain white in each of these. These are 12.5-inch blocks. So I'm going to cut some 13-inch squares and then cut those diagonally in half. So I'll need to cut 4 squares to make 8 triangles. The other way to finish one of these off would be to make a half a block. And I do have a quilt that I made that way, and I'll try and show you that before I finish the video. But for now, let's just do the plain white blocks and see how that finishes this off. I've moved these squares around a little bit to just vary the colour pattern. I have my side triangles and bottom and top triangles now that I'm just laying in. I'm hand holding this camera, I hope it's not too shaky so that you can see what I'm doing. So once I've laid all these in, you'll be able to see that it's the shape of a quilt. So I'll go around there and put the other side in a minute. But do you see how that's coming along there? You can see the pattern better now. Now, the last thing I've got to do is this corner here. I'm just laying the corners on here. Now the corners were a 9 3/8 inch square cut diagonally, and you need to cut 2 of those to make the corners, to make 4 corners. Each square makes 2. Now you can see it all laid out, and all we have to do is sew that together. I have this laid out here so you can get a pretty good view of the way it's going to look when it's sewn together. I have the side pieces on here and the corners on here. This is going to be sewn together in diagonal rows, and that's what makes it so simple. The first thing we're going to do is sew the corners on. The best thing is just to get a pin. Flip that corner over, put a pin in there, take it to the sewing machine. So let's do that. Now you need to know what the centre point is of this triangle square. So to get that, I'm just going to fold it in half and put a pin, just so I know where the centre is. You could just mark it with a dot, with a marker or something if you wanted. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. And then I need the centre of this block along the edge that I'm going to sew. So again, I'm just going to mark it with a pin. Now, some of these corners and side pieces, they will be cut on the cross. This one's cut on the cross. I'm not sure if you can see that really on camera, but that means that I'll have to be careful about not stretching the fabric. So I'm never going to pull on it. I'm just going to gently smooth it into position. And that little triangle corner will overhang just a little bit. Then I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch down this edge. Press this open, and that corner's done. And people are really worried about sewing things that are on the cross grain of the fabric, but the secret is just treat it gently, don't pull on it, and it won't be a problem. So I'm going to do all 4 corners the same as this one. Each time I sew a corner or a row, I'm coming back here and I'm laying it back in place, because this kind of a quilt, you need to keep the pieces the right way round, where you want them. So this is my way of keeping it in order. So next we're going to sew this piece on here. And so this is where I'm just showing you how easy it is to put these triangle pieces on. This is just going to fold over to there. See, that's just a normal sewing edge now. I'm going to pin it. I'll actually pin that evenly and properly back in the sewing room, but I'm just pinning it in place for now so you can see. Open it back out and flip the other side over. So that's also on there. And put a pin in it. Now I'm going to take that, sew my 1/4 inch seam, and this big corner will be done. And then we'll go on to doing one of the rows. So I hope you can see that there's absolutely nothing complicated at all about this. It's just going to be a straight sewing seam, just like any other. Again, it is on the bias, so I am pinning carefully and not stretching this edge. Just making sure this all stays laying flat. So do you see how that's on there now? And I'm just going to do the other side in the same way. And there are 2 corners to do like this. So you'll do this one and the one diagonally opposite. So I've put the corner back into position, and the other corner is done the same way. I'm going to pull this corner back a little bit, because what I've done, the next row, I've kind of separated it out. There we go. So that you can see just exactly what we're sewing here. So we're going along here. So we're going to work along this row. This is that odd little side triangle. All it's going to do is fold over to there, just like the corner triangle did, and it'll just be a straight sew down there. No different to anything else. So I'm going to put a pin in that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this whole row together. Now, these 2 are the next 2 that go together, so I'm going to fold them over. Put a pin. Of course, these aren't pinned properly. When I get to the sewing machine, I'll pin these exactly in place. And then this one to this one. And finally, the last side triangle is just going to flip over and sew down there. And on these, it's this corner that you're matching. And it'll just work out right. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew this row together. Now, I don't know if you can see that. You will notice that there's always this little tail hanging over on these triangles, and that's the way it's supposed to be. When you pin them together, don't try to match that corner exactly to there. Let this piece hang over, otherwise there's no folding room. This is just a straightforward block to block seam. I've gone along the quilt and I've sewn each row together into long strips. Now that all these rows are sewn together, the only thing left to do is sew strip to strip. So I'm just going to go along, starting at this bottom corner. I'm just going to fold that up, match it, nest the seams if possible, and sew 1/4 inch along here. Just put in a couple of pins here. Now, when that one's sewn on, I'll bring it back here and I'll just flip so that it sits along there. I'll pin it and I'll just sew along there until all these long seams are sewn. So as you can see, it's just 4 or 5 long seams. So I have sewn this corner piece on to the next strip, so that part's done. And now I've pinned it to the next part. And I'm just going to sew it all down this seam. And the only part that really I do want to point out to you is that on the very edges, you'll see again that this little pointy triangle is here. I'm showing you that because I don't want you to think that it's wrong. If you don't have that, when you have sewn it and pinned it back, you don't have anything here. You'd have a raw edge, so that does have to hang over a little bit. And when you lay your pieces down, if you match the block seams, it'll just automatically hang over probably the right amount. If you've been careful how you've cut and sewn, it should be right, but make sure that's there when you pin it up. So I'm just going to sew along here. When quilts are put together in a diagonal way like this, they seem to go together really quickly. Right, I'm actually going to stop sewing and turn my camera off here because this is so bulky. It's just going to knock my camera over otherwise. So I'll just finish sewing this off camera. This quilt is all done now. The last thing I'm going to do with it is I'm going to put a ruler along the edges and just trim these little tags off. And then I'm going to put a border on, which is just going to be black. And I'll measure the actual quilt size before I decide how wide the border is, but it'll be about 2 or 3 inches. Now, just to save time, I do have one that's completed and quilted and everything like that. And I'm going to get that out and show you so you can see what the finished version looks like. But I think this looks really pretty. It's a great scrap quilt. The white, in this case I used yardage that I bought, and it does take quite a lot. I don't have much left out of a 2-yard piece of yardage, which is quite surprising really. But again, you don't have to do it all the same colour. You could just use all different whites or very lights, and it just depends what scraps you've got. This is a different kind of a scrap. These are quite big leftover pieces from someone else. So they're scrap, but scrap in a different way to all my little itty bitty bits that I have left. Some of this fabric is really pretty, and it's made a good result, I think. This is the quilt I said that I would show you. It's the same quilt, just a different version. And this one is made not out of scraps, but out of a jelly roll. So it's good use for a jelly roll as well. And if you look down the sides, I didn't use the white triangles. I used half of a patterned block. This is the second part of the video with the secondary quilt. Now this is about as simple a quilt as you can make. So as you know, I cut a lot of 5-inch squares. And as I've been sewing the other quilt together, I've been sewing these together in pairs. So I already had a lot of these sewn together. So what I wanted to do was showcase this butterfly fabric. So I made 3 large blocks. These are 15.5 by 15.5, and I just think this is so pretty, this fabric. I also cut some strips to surround it. So these strips are 2 inches and each one needs two that is 15.5 inches long. Have these ready prepared for this quilt rather than sew it all together. This is with the 2-inch sewn onto the side. And now along the top I need to sew an 18.5 inch strip. Once I've sewn that on, my block will be 18.5 inches unfinished. And there is the one block with this green surrounding it. There'll be 3 like that when I've completed them. My 5-inch squares that I've been sewing are now sewn into strips of 4, and those 4 I'm going to join 4 rows to make a 16 block set. Do you see how simple this is? And this is one of the blocks that I ended up with. I'm making 6 of those. Then I'll lay it out and show you the arrangement I'm going to make with it. And here's the finished quilt. I laid 3 large blocks in rows. 3 at the top, 3 in the next row, 3 in the bottom row. Just sewed the whole thing together. And I just really like the way this has come out. You don't need a fancy pattern. The fabric has done all the work here in this quilt. And it's very busy. It kind of depends on your taste, what you like, but I really like this. In fact, I don't really want to give it away now I've made it, but I am still going to. So it's not going to have a border on. It's already large enough. It just needs to have a backing and to be quilted. And it can go and be donated. So just to show you how you can make such a simple pattern, just literally the squares sewn together, didn't take very long at all. So these are 2 nice quick quilts made from remnants or scraps, or even jelly rolls and yardage if you have it for the dripping diamond quilt. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please click the notification bell for more Scrappy quilts, or Sashiko if you like Sashiko. And thanks for watching.